This is our first week of bye weeks in the NFL, so you're going to expect to see guys like Rome Odunze, Drake London, and DK Metcalf be left off this list. But I'm doing everything I can to get us ready for Week 5 fantasy football, so please go down there and drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Now get into our first tier of guys. We've still got a really good first tier of guys right here, led by Puka Nacua and Amon-Ra St. Brown. So Puka Nacua is playing on Thursday night versus the San Francisco 49ers. And if history has taught us anything so far this season, it's just that most defenses aren't as great on Thursday night games. Short week, the 49ers are coming off brutal injuries, and Puka Nacua is just flat out crushing it. Yes, the Seahawks did well last week on Thursday Night Football. That's an elite defense. The 49ers were a really good defense, but they've had so many injuries to that entire team, and that back end is getting injured as well. I don't see Puka Nacua not continuing to have a great season in Week 5. Now, Amon-Ra St. Brown at Cincinnati, I think that's also an ideal matchup as well when you factor in how bad the Bengals look as a team. Like, this team, really the only concern here is that they get up to like a 21-0 lead so early in the game that they just decide we don't need to throw the ball anymore. But even last week, I mean, they crushed the Browns, and Amon-Ra St. Brown has just been in the end zone time and time again. He's their clear number one target. The guy's on an elite offense. You do not want to put him much lower than number 2 against a bad defense. And at number 3, I've got George Pickens inside of tier 1 to round out this tier, and he's going to take on the Jets. Now, I said this a couple of weeks ago with Sauce Gardner, and you guys know I like to talk about cornerbacks when it comes to wide receiver matchups in fantasy football. And I said, Sauce Gardner is not one of those guys that I take into account. I think he's very overpaid. I think he's very overrated. And he's been proving me right ever since I said that. Now he gets to take on George Pickens. So again, there's going to be people I bet that are in the comments saying he's better than you think. Listen, all I've seen is him get mossed last week, just last night against Darren Waller. George Pickens is looking great with Dallas as that number 1. I want to take on the Jets defense because they stink right now. Now, dropping down to our next tier, I've got Nico Collins at number 4 and Jackson Smith-Njigba at 5 to round out this tier. I think it's a very exclusive tier because the next tier we'll get into, you'll see why I did this. Nico Collins at the Baltimore Ravens. Listen, the Ravens defense is very fascinating to me because I just always thought this defense was better than it really is, I guess. I mean, Nico Collins is on this bad offense that can't really move the ball unless they play the Tennessee Titans because they can't move the ball. Well, as of right now, I'm operating under the assumption that Lamar Jackson does not play in this game because they're very quiet on this, and that's usually not a good sign. Nico Collins, of course, still is that number 1 target over there in Houston. He's capable of a big play at any point. And the way the Ravens secondary has looked, I kind of bet he's going to have a big game. And then Jackson Smith-Njigba versus the Tampa Bay Bucks. It's a very similar matchup to Nico. I mean, Jackson Smith-Njigba is getting to play a bad secondary that's given up tons of points left and right to opposing offenses, whether it's on the ground or in the passing game. I mean, the Bucks defense just isn't very good. And Jackson Smith-Njigba, I said this last week, this is a superstar wide receiver here. I mean, he's their clear wide receiver 1, and Sam Darnold's playing good enough football to get him top fantasy production, which he has done basically the majority of the season. So I'm going to continue to bet on JSN. Now, dropping down to our next tier, I've got Garrett Wilson at 6 and Quentin Johnston at number 7. Now, you can see how much bigger this tier is than the previous tier. I don't think that either guy belongs in tier 2 because I still have my own questions and doubts about these guys. I mean, Garrett Wilson proved me wrong once again when he came out on Monday night and he just basically was a fantastic player all over again. I mean, the reality with this guy is he is just a dominant player that has bad quarterback play. And that's the thing that I still get bothered by, is it will not change regardless of matchup. And this matchup is probably the best in the league versus the Dallas Cowboys this week. But I can't help but to think Garrett Wilson with a bad quarterback, when does it all come crashing down and we see a performance like he gave us in week 2 versus the Buffalo Bills? I don't think it's this week. That's why he's at 6, but I still do worry about the quarterback situation. And Quentin Johnston versus the Washington Commanders. Listen, by all accounts, this has been their wide receiver 1, especially in fantasy, through the first 4 weeks. So by all accounts, I don't see how it just stops and comes to a grinding halt. That's why I've got the confidence to put him at 7 this week versus a bad defense. But of course, I always discuss bottom line metrics that you can find on fsroundup.com. And the two bottom line metrics that I'm always looking at is total snaps and routes run in a game. And he is still second fiddle to Ladd McConkey. So I do not put it past Ladd to have a big game against this defense as well. But that being said, the way QJ is playing right now, the guy's on a roll. I think they're going to continue to feed him down the field. Xavier Worthy's at 8, and Emeka Egbuka is at number 9. Now, Xavier Worthy is at Jacksonville this week, and again, this is a really good matchup against a defense that I just don't think is actually that good. They're 3-1, but I think it's kind of a mirage in a little bit of ways. Now, Xavier Worthy came back right away and was dominant in his performance versus the Baltimore Ravens. Now, again, that was a great matchup for Xavier Worthy, but I still view the Jacksonville Jaguars as a similarly great matchup for him. So Xavier Worthy, he continues to get targets out of this offense. He continues to be very important to this offense. He's basically their number one receiver right now. So with Patrick Mahomes playing the way he is, yes, Xavier Worthy absolutely belongs to number 8. And Emeka Egbuka actually dropped for me at 9 because he's playing the Seattle Seahawks in Seattle. I think this matchup is really brutal. The Seahawks defense is they've got to be the best in the world. I mean, they're a fantastic defense right now, and they're coming off a long, basically mini bye week. So I just don't see how the Tampa Bay Bucks put up a great performance offensively. That being said, I have been getting tons of comments about my enthusiasm for Emeka Egbuka, and it's like, guys, this is their wide receiver 1 right now. I get it. Chris Godwin came back and had 10 targets. Egbuka just continues to dominate on every opportunity he gets. Like, he's going to be top 10 this week, regardless of matchup. But he is at 9 because this matchup is brutal. At number 10 and 11, to round out this tier, it's Justin Jefferson and Davante Adams. So Justin Jefferson goes overseas yet again to go play the Cleveland Browns. These overseas games suck, and I think that the Vikings are going to be better this week because they just do. I mean, they've been there for 2 weeks straight now. How do you not get better? But Justin Jefferson, listen, with Carson Wentz, he definitely had his best game in week 4 versus the Steelers. And the Cleveland Browns, I do understand where people are coming from when they say this is a good defense. But at the same time, man, the Cleveland offense is so bad that the Vikings defense is going to be able to score points on them. So Justin Jefferson has another opportunity. Now, if he ends up playing with J.J. McCarthy this week, he will drop. You can expect that because J.J. McCarthy is just not as good as Carson Wentz is right now in NFL terms. And especially for fantasy football, Carson Wentz is the better quarterback for Justin Jefferson. So if he plays with J.J. McCarthy, look out and keep track of these rankings on fsroundup.com. When you are in the premium subscription, you can have access to my weekly top 260 plus rankings in fantasy football. So you can expect to see him drop. And then Davante Adams at 11 on that Thursday night game versus the San Francisco 49ers. Listen, I just don't see how it doesn't continue to go well. I get it. He's not the wide receiver 1. That's clearly Puka. But Davante Adams is such a consistent red zone threat. He's one of the best red zone receivers of my lifetime. And he continues to be used like that by Matt Stafford, who is playing really well, playing really good football right now. So Davante Adams, I said this over the past couple of weeks, this is the best wide receiver 2 for fantasy football on any NFL roster. So Davante Adams definitely stays inside the top 12 versus the San Francisco 49ers, who I did say, they're so injured right now, it's hard for me not to see them doing well to a point, but I will still give respect to Robert Saleh and not having 2 top 5 or top 10 wide receivers in fantasy on the same team in the same matchup. Now, dropping down to our next tier, I've got Deebo Samuel at number 12, and Michael Pittman Jr. is at 13. Now, again, this is a very small tier right here, and you'll see why when we go into the next tier. But Deebo Samuel, this guy is just playing really good football right now. I mean, the guy looks like he did with the San Francisco 49ers. And I don't care what the matchup is. And this one is, I would argue, not ideal, but at the same time, I would also argue just based on injuries, they're beatable right now defensively. So I just do see that this Deebo Samuel situation is clearly working out. And on top of that, it looks like Jaden Daniels will be back this week by early accounts. So if he is back, Deebo Samuel is definitely a top 12 guy for me, and I don't really care how many times he's in the game on snap counts. This guy is getting the rock every time he's in the game, and he's just too important to the offense, especially without Terry McLaurin. Michael Pittman Jr. at 13 versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Listen, this matchup is so ideal for any situation. I just don't, again, see him having a great ceiling like guys in the previous tier above him. Like, you can look at all of his best games this year, and they're good games. But at the same time, they're not giving you 20, 25, 30-point games in fantasy football because Daniel Jones still has his limitations, which is fine because Michael Pittman Jr. is still a really good wide receiver, and this offense is very efficient right now. You can expect that same efficiency versus the Las Vegas Raiders, but just don't expect massive fantasy performances. And then Keenan Allen's at 14 versus the Washington Commanders. And listen, I kind of don't know what to do with him right now because Keenan Allen has been important enough to consistently rank inside the top 30. But I will say this, like the Washington defense, yes, it's a good matchup, but just I just don't know what to do with these Chargers receivers just yet because I do still see Keenan Allen as a top tier option in a lot of situations. And I do still see Ladd McConkey getting a big game at some point. So I'm kind of just at a loss for words with these Chargers wide receivers right now. That being said, like this whole entire passing offense on the Los Angeles Chargers is just running too well right now not to have two Chargers wide receivers inside the top 15. But this is a great question to pose as a poll on a start-sit poll on FSRoundup.com. Michael Pittman Jr. versus Keenan Allen. In fact, let's go do that right now. Let's go search up Keenan Allen and then go to week 5, post a poll, and type in Michael Pittman Jr. and see what the community says. And go help out other people on their polls and their start-sit decisions as well, while you wait to get help from everybody in live action to see what you should do on a weekly basis. This is completely free on FS Roundup. And again, if you want to see access to my full top 260 rankings on a weekly basis, you can see those by getting a premium subscription on FS Roundup. And in addition to that, you're going to get access to the free waiver tool, which is saving teams in 2025 fantasy football.
This is Ted. Ted desperately needs to pick up a new running back, or his fantasy team is toast. Don't be Ted. Use Fantasy Football Roundup to automate your waiver pickups and rest easy this season.
Now, dropping down to our next tier right here, I've got Courtland Sutton at 15 and Jamar Chase at 16. Now, Courtland Sutton is taking on the Philadelphia Eagles in Philly, so this matchup is not ideal. I've been kind of above consensus on Courtland Sutton for several weeks straight now, and it's proven me right. But Courtland Sutton, this matchup, no question, is not great. I mean, I don't think the Philadelphia Eagles will let Courtland Sutton beat them in the passing game. I think they will hone in on stopping that run over there and stopping Courtland Sutton and making guys like Evan Ingram beat them, making guys like Troy Franklin beat them. So I don't see the greatest game for Sutton, but that being said, since he is still the number one read, of course there's always a chance that he does well and provides you a good game. So I'm going to keep him at 15 to safeguard myself from a bad game while also acknowledging he's clearly their wide receiver one. And Jamar Chase is 16. Listen, I know it's tough to know what to do with this guy right now. Like, it is not lost on me that he has had 2 straight bad weeks, and this offense doesn't look like they can move the ball. And I did say this heading into last week as well. The Bengals were going to have another bad week. And listen, they may have another bad week again this week. Based on the way Detroit's defense has looked, it doesn't look like it's that great of an opportunity. But I will say this, guys. And I know it's easy for me to say this just sitting behind a camera and telling you guys this, but I'm not ranking Jamar Chase in the 20s when there's bye weeks this week and he's an elite player in this league. I believe that they will figure something out to get him the ball because the reality is if you've looked at the past 2 weeks and the amount they've got him the ball, well, it doesn't add up to this team that can continue to move the ball well without getting it to their number one player. So they'll force him the ball this week. I do think that he'll be a top 20 finish this week. So I've got him here at 16 while also acknowledging it could go very badly again against the Lions defense. Ted McMillan's at 17 and Chris Olave is at 18. And listen, Ted McMillan is just in this really bad spot because Carolina's offense looks abysmal again. Bryce Young, I genuinely don't know, when is he going to get benched for Andy Dalton? And it may be better for Ted McMillan to have Andy Dalton as his quarterback. I don't think that's happening just yet. The Miami Dolphins are always a good matchup for wide receivers as well. So I do still see potential upside here for Ted, because if you look at the target share, he's clearly their number one guy. He is their Drake London, basically. But he does not have a good quarterback right now, and that is not questionable. So that limits his upside on a weekly basis in fantasy. And Chris Olave at 18. Listen, I've been under-ranking Chris Olave for certain. I mean, the guy is getting targets out the wazoo on a weekly basis. So obviously with bye weeks, he's got to be inside the top 20, top 25 at the very least. So at 18 here, I feel like this is still going to be viewed as disrespect by certain people. But I will remind you of this. Listen, the New Orleans Saints offense, it just isn't very good. Spencer Rattler's not a very good quarterback. So it's similar to Michael Pittman Jr., where it's like the upside is capped with a bad quarterback relatively. And I will say this, even though he's been consistent, he's not getting big weeks. So I just don't see how you could put him much higher than 18. But I think 18 is a respectable ranking for Olave, considering the offense he's on. Chris Godwin is at 19, and Ladd McConkey, yes, is at 20. So Chris Godwin at the Seattle Seahawks, there's no debating that the target share was immediately there for Chris Godwin. So I expect him to continue to get a lot of targets. But I said this with Emeka Egbuka. This is a tough matchup. The Seattle Seahawks are one of the best, if not the very best defenses all around in the NFL. So I do not see this making it easy on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And Chris Godwin, a second week back, he'll probably be better, but they were definitely not on the same page, him and Baker in week one. So I don't see tremendous upside with Godwin just yet, especially with this matchup. And Ladd McConkey at 20, I understand. I'll say this another week straight. I understand that not all of these wide receivers in Los Angeles are going to be top 30 guys. Listen, they take on the Washington Commanders, so I know it's a good matchup, though. And again, Ladd McConkey, when you look at bottom line metrics for wide receivers, snap counts and routes run, he's at the top every single week for the Los Angeles Chargers. I find it very hard to believe that based on those metrics that he won't have a breakout game at some point. I get it. He's coming off a bad week and really a bad month if you think about it. But Ladd McConkey, I've still got him inside the top 30 because I believe the breakout is imminent, and you could bookmark this. And at 21 to round out this tier, this big tier right here, I've got Jacoby Myers at the Indianapolis Colts this week. Listen, this offense is just it's so bad right now, but at the same time, I've always said this about Geno. Geno's a great fantasy quarterback because he provides upside to pass catchers while also providing upside to fantasy defenses. And I think that's the beauty of Geno Smith, is that he can still do that. And Jacoby Myers, I get it, didn't have the greatest week last week. Nobody really did except Ashton Genty. But Jacoby Myers still sees too many targets in this offense. And Geno Smith, I do still think, is a functional quarterback when it comes to getting his wide receivers the ball enough. So I do think that Jacoby Myers at the Indianapolis Colts this week probably has a bounce back week, because it's kind of hard not to when you're getting targeted like that on a weekly basis. Now, dropping down to our next tier, I've got Brian Thomas Jr. at 22 and Marvin Harrison Jr. at 23. Brian Thomas Jr. versus the Kansas City Chiefs. This one continues to remain a mystery to me. And listen, maybe the easy explanation is that him and Trevor Lawrence just don't work that well together. I think that's very possible. And the Kansas City Chiefs is not a good matchup. So if he continues to just not click with Trevor Lawrence, it's not getting any better versus the Kansas City Chiefs. That being said, I have not lost sight of the talent that he is and the workload that he gets on a weekly basis. They want to get him the ball. That's no question. Travis Hunter has not been involved enough to really threaten Brian Thomas Jr. like I thought he would. And Brian Thomas Jr. is just not coming through on the work that he's being given. But they don't really have much of a choice because he still is their most talented wide receiver in this offense. So I do still see him having a top 30 finish potentially versus the Kansas City Chiefs on Monday night. And then Marvin Harrison Jr. versus Tennessee. People probably will view this as a low ranking. If you didn't watch the game, it probably makes sense. But if you watched that game and you took away what I took away, his second half of that game, particularly the fourth quarter, really just canceled out what he did for 3 quarters of that game. 3 quarters of that game, you thought this guy was awful. Like, people would have considered dropping him after a performance like he would have had if he didn't have that fourth quarter performance. But of course he comes out and dominates the fourth quarter. So it's harder for people to look at it and say, how is he not ranked higher? Listen, guys, Marvin Harrison Jr. is what he is. It's a mental case of a player that's extremely talented, but clearly doesn't have confidence at every level of his game. It wouldn't shock me if he comes out and just destroys your team once again. So proceed with caution on this one, but of course, the matchup versus Tennessee is fine. Zay Flowers at 24 and Jameson Williams at 25 to round out this tier. Now, Zay Flowers versus the Houston Texans, I do think is a beatable matchup to an extent. But again, I'm operating under the assumption that Lamar Jackson does not play in this game. So if he plays, he'll rise up a little bit. But at the same time, I will say this. Cooper Rush, when he came into the game, he was targeting Zay Flowers. So it does appear that Zay Flowers will be a top 30 guy to me, regardless of who his quarterback is, because he's too important to this offense, and I've been saying this for weeks. I get it, not always on a weekly basis does Lamar target him to a big extent, but Zay Flowers versus the Houston Texans, if Lamar doesn't play, I still have him at 24. Jameson Williams is at 25 to round out this tier. Again, matchup is fantastic. And realistically, outside of 1 week, he has not been playable. But I will say this, in week 4, if you paid attention, he had 7 targets in that game. They just didn't hit on any of them. And they really didn't need to because they crushed the Cleveland Browns. But this week against the Cincinnati Bengals, I just want in on this opportunity because when you factor in the matchup and how good it is, and when you factor in how great this offense is, and factor in the targets from last week, he still has potential to be a top-tier fantasy option this week. So 25 might end up being a low ranking, but as many of you know, it's hard to rank J-Mo based on the target share. And dropping down to our last tier, Jalen Waddle's at 26 and Devonta Smith is at 27. Now, Jalen Waddle, of course, his upside is up without Tyreek Hill. I mean, Tyreek Hill basically split his knee in half. I mean, it was really disgusting and gruesome to watch if you want to know the truth and haven't seen it. But if you have seen it, you know that Tyreek is not coming back, which therefore increases Jalen Waddle's upside just by default. So against the Carolina Panthers this week, in theory, the matchup is great, but this Miami offense realistically is just not going to start throwing the ball down the field and pushing it down the field more without Tyreek Hill. Like, if anything, it's just going to get worse, and everything is going to continue to be at or basically around the line of scrimmage. So his upside is not that high, but it is higher, of course, without Tyreek Hill. And Devonta Smith versus Denver. Listen, A.J. Brown has already been bad, and it's getting worse because he's becoming a real distraction with a team that's 4-0. But this is a worse matchup for him because Pat Surtain will likely be on him the whole game. So I think it opens up opportunities for Devonta Smith. Now, of course, Devonta Smith is just not involved enough on a weekly basis for me to rank him much higher than this. And the Philly offense, passing-wise, is just not as dominant to where I can't realistically rank them much higher than this offensively. So I do still see limitations here for Devonta Smith, but I do think it's going to start to get better for Devonta Smith over time. Now, at number 28, I've got Tyquan Thornton. Here's our last 3 guys. You're going to love this. Tyquan Thornton at 28 and Kendrick Bourne at 29. Tyquan Thornton, listen, I think he's done enough for me to recognize him as a top 30 play this week. If you factor in matchups and bye weeks, I think that Tyquan Thornton and the involvement that he's seen on a weekly basis, basically, at least deserves consideration as a top 30 player. And for me, he is top 30. So I've got Tyquan Thornton here, well aware that he only had 1 target last week, but his chemistry that he's showing with Patrick Mahomes, it's really, really good. So against Jacksonville's defense, I want options in the matchup. And with the amount of bye weeks, the bad matchups, I want Tyquan Thornton in this matchup. And at 29, Kendrick Bourne at the Los Angeles Rams this week. If you did not know, this offense is, like, I don't even know what to say. It's so bad. And I continue to say this. This San Francisco doctor just needs to be investigated with the amount of injuries they see on a yearly basis. Ricky Pearsall didn't practice on Monday. Juwan Jennings didn't practice on Monday. Brock Purdy didn't practice on Monday. They have no other option but to throw to Kendrick Bourne. And the past 2 weeks, he's been involved. So I will say this. Kendrick Bourne, just based off necessity, is probably going to be a top 30 guy this week for the San Francisco 49ers. I don't have much insight onto how well he's playing. Like, I know that he's important enough, but I know that he's not a great player. But the 49ers will use him, especially if Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall are both out. And at 30, Elick Aymaner is at 30 at the Arizona Cardinals this week. Listen, Elick Aymaner, I'm playing him over A.J. Brown. I'm playing him over Khalil Shakir. And I'm playing him over Jordan Addison. And those are my next 3 guys. But Elick Aymaner is clearly, to me, the wide receiver one in this offense, and Calvin Ridley is also injured. So if you factor in everything, the chemistry that he's had with Cam Ward has just been better than the chemistry that Calvin has had with Cam Ward. I think Eli Gaymaner is a solid play this week and would personally play over a lot of big names. So let me know what you think of this week's wide receiver rankings in the comments below. And if you want to see the buy low candidates for week 5 fantasy football, click on this video right here.